Because I still have a fair amount of the yellow and the red paint on my palette, I'm going to go ahead and move to assignment number 2, and that is the tints, tones, and shades of tertiary colors. So I've filled a page in my sketchbook, and I'm thinking in terms of the elements and principles of design and how shapes balance with each other, how there's background shapes because there's overlapping that occurs, so I'll create a little depth to this piece. And I want 18 shapes, and so shapes can also, appear in the background. So here's a beginning shape, and then the background shape goes behind what's coming forward. I've also added to my palette a little bit of white and a little bit of black. And I want to begin the mixing process again. So I'm going to start with my yellow-orange, and I'll proceed to do a tint of the yellow-orange, followed by a tone, followed by a shade. So I'm going to pull a fair amount of the yellow back into the mixing area. Remember that it takes just a little corner of the bristle of the brush to get the red and to change this yellow to look like yellow-orange. And I think I'm going to mix up a larger amount because, again, I have larger shapes in my sketchbook than I did on the color wheel. And I have to extend this paint into tints, tones, and shades. So here's my pure hue of yellow-orange. Hue is another word for color. I have that really well mixed. Now I'm going to create a tint. And a similar thing, just as it took very little color to change the yellow, it's going to take very little color to change the white. So I'm going to pull some of this white off to the side, and my brush already has that pigment in it, so it's immediately changing this white. And I'm going to go with that as being my tint. Again, I want the tint, the tone, and the shade to look very different from each other. A little bit more white. And I need pure white to make my tone, which will be mixing this yellow-orange with gray. So you can see how I'm starting to use a lot more of this whole palette. And again, I pull paint into the center of the pool of pigment and rotate the brush, and I'm going to go with this. And we'll start in this corner here and filling my shape with a tint of the tertiary color yellow-orange. Continuing to use the corner of the bristles of the brush to get me the edge control that I want. Stabilize my hand on top of the sketchbook and only move the brush. And the flatness of the brush has a lot of paint in it, and it fills the shape up pretty quickly. Okay, there's my tint. Now, I still have quite a bit of this tint here, and I'm not going to use it again, but what I want to do is make my tone. So I'm going to add some white, clean off as much of this brush, come back to the yellow-orange puddle, pull that over, Mix that up. And now I'm going to get a very small amount of black because this has white in it already. And the black and the white will create the gray. And it also has the yellow orange in it. You can see that change pretty quickly. Again, just like it took very little red to change the yellow, it takes very little black to change the tint to a tone. I'm going to pull a little bit more pigment in because this is looking more gray to me than a tone of the yellow orange. So get more of the tertiary color in here. That looks a little bit more like it. And you notice that it's starting to almost take on a green appearance. And part of that is the black that we're using has a strong blue base to it. Sometimes blacks can be cool, which means that they look a little bit more blue in appearance, or blacks can be warm, and that means that they look a little bit more red or brown in appearance. And this is a cooler black. So I'm going to go with that as my tone, and I'll put that on this shape here. It's a fairly large shape, so I'm going to need a fair amount of paint. Fill up the center of it first. And then work on my edge control. Keep my hand stabilized on the sketchbook. Drag just the corner along the edge of the shape. Get just the corner into the corner of the shape. Rotate the sketchbook. And the tint of yellow orange and the tone of yellow orange are looking very, very different from each other. And that's what I want. If they look too similar, it probably means that you need more black in your gray for the tone. And I don't know if you remember how much paint I had on my palette, but I've almost used it up. It's a fair amount needed for this shape because it's pretty large. And then finally, I need to mix up a shade. Now my brush currently has a fair amount of white in it. My tone had a very light gray in it. So what I would do now is take this over to the sink and wash it really, really well with brush cleaner. In the meantime, what I will do is start out with a different brush to mix the shade. So I go back here and I have my pool of the same yellow-orange that I used, and I'm going to do this background shape, which is even bigger than the shape where my tone was. So I'm going to proceed to mix a little bit more. I might even use all of this yellow at this point. Get a little bit more of the red in here. Increase the amount of yellow-orange that I have. I'm actually winding up using all of my yellow. Mix this well. And I'm going to pull this over here, turn it around, and now I want my shade. And I don't want any white to be in the shade, it's just black. So I'm going to touch the corner, pull it in, and you can see very, very little paint was needed to change the appearance of that tertiary yellow-orange. Now my question is, am I going to have enough paint to complete this background shape? And we'll see in a moment. If I'm in doubt, I might mix up a little bit more of my tertiary color, but I'm going to pull as much of this over here. I could add a little bit more black, but I don't want it to be so dark that I can't see the color anymore. And again, this now looks extremely different than my tint and my tone, which is good. And I don't know if you can see on the projected image, but again, it's looking greenish. And that would be because I'm using a cooler black. So here we go with the shade of the tertiary color, yellow-orange, and filling up this background space. Now, white tends to be a little bit more opaque, and you get pretty solid coverage, which is nice. Black is more transparent, and what I'm finding is a lot of streaks, and I'm not real happy with that. So I'm going to finish this shape up, and I'm going to mix up another batch of both the yellow-orange and then the shade, the yellow-orange, so that I get a much more even appearance for this background shape. Because I want a dark shape back there. It's going to recede nicely into space. It's really going to give the appearance of something being in the background. Just like when you overlap shapes and you can make something look like it's going farther back in space, the same thing is true with colors. A duller color is going to appear farther back in space, and brighter colors will appear to come forward. So my tint is the brightest of these three, and it's sitting forward, and it looks like it's coming forward. But of all three of these shapes, the smoothest in appearance is the tint, and that's because white is a nice opaque paint that gives pretty solid coverage. The black is almost like watercolor, where it's very, very transparent and a lot of the paper is coming through. So remember the artist habits of mind, persistence, and engagement as you're working, and don't settle for things looking sort of half done. Continue with that engagement process and get things to look the way you are proud of them looking. And well crafted, well mixed, well designed. And I'm almost done here, and I'm really, really running out of paint. So a second layer is going to be super important to get the appearance looking nicely done. and it's kind of hard for me to spread what I have, but I'm going to try and fill this up. Use what's left in the bristles of my brush and go back and mix my shade up again. See, I'm almost using a scrubbing technique to get everything off my brush because I'm running out very quickly here. So there's coverage, but it's not pleasing to the eye coverage. And I think as I'm looking at this one, this could also do with a second layer to get a real nice solid color. It'll just look better in appearance. So that's the first section, and now I can go back to my color wheel and start working some other areas. I could also, since I have red on the palette, do my tertiary color of the red-orange and do an area here with the tints, tones and shades of the red-orange. And that is the assignment.